Hello, Salt Spring Island. My name's Jai here with Salt Spring Life, and I am thrilled to have Dr. Hannah Webb here with us. Really appreciate your time, Hannah, and really excited to get to know you better. And I thought we could start with you sharing just a little bit about what it's like being a naturopathic doctor and what kind of approach you bring to your practice and to supporting your clients.
Sure. Well, likewise, Jai, and thanks for inviting me to be here and chat with you today. I am a naturopathic physician, which to me, the way I always explain it to my patients and people who come and seek my services is that I say I'm the bridge between the world of conventional medicine and the world of alternative medicine, because I have training in both and I speak the language of both. So it allows me to be able to understand the whole spectrum of what tools are available. On the more conventional side, some of the things that I do that are similar to seeing a medical doctor are I do physical exams and I run conventional lab work and I can prescribe pharmaceutical medications. And I also have a whole set of tools that are what we often think of as being alternative or holistic medicine tools, which I mean, recognizing, acknowledging it's a false dichotomy. And the holistic tools I use are a lot of lifestyle change, dietary strategies, which can look like specific nutrient supplementation or dietary specific therapeutic diets. I also use a lot of herbal medicine. I do acupuncture. I do high dose vitamin mineral IV therapies, and I do some mind body therapies. And I do heavy metal chelation. So, that's a really wide spectrum of tools. And I don't usually use all of those tools with every patient that I see, but it really gives me a diverse toolkit so that I can really work with each individual patient in what their needs are. And that's really my goal and what I see as being unique about naturopathic medicine. And as it pertains to our conversation today, we're talking about anxiety and maybe depression, just mental health in general. There's such a spectrum of tools that are available, and how do you know what type of tool is necessary? And so for me to be able to have that conversation and say, well, look, I can prescribe you a medication. Here's the pros and cons. Here's the role I see that having in your healing journey. And also that's not the be all end all. And here's some other considerations for you to think about. I also like to say, it's not just that I have a different set of tools than your conventional medical doctor. I also am trained to think in a different way. So my goal is to, my initial visit is 75 minutes long. So I'm asking my patients, what's your main concern? But also we're going to talk about how's your sleep and what's your diet like and how's your sense of community and what's your menstrual cycle like, and all of those different things that play into your health in a really holistic sense. And I think of it as a person's individual ecology, which is all of those environmental factors, all the lifestyle factors. And then I'm always thinking about organ function. How's each of the organs in their system doing? Do we just to support any of the organs? And then I also think of the individual ecology being all those layers of body, mind, and spirit, because sometimes an imbalance is really physiological and we need to support them on that level. But sometimes it's a lot more coming from an emotional plane or a spiritual plane. And there's you need to really understand where that person's at in order to help them figure out what's going to be the most effective intervention for them in the place that they're at. And so the gift I have is the gift of time. And so we can really explore some of those mind-body connections if that's part of what's going on for a person.
I really appreciate that. That's a awesome explanation. And I like that idea of spending time with a client and actually getting to know who they are, because we are such diverse creatures. So, one size doesn't fit all. So allowing that time and allowing that opportunity really to get to know somebody, I think can provide a lot more of an effective treatment and really more trusting relationship in some ways too, because you're actually spending time with that person, understanding sort of the holistic mind-body connection. And I remember when we first chatted, we had a common history working with at-risk youth and sort of vulnerable populations in general. And I spent, a lot of my early career managing social service programs and hearing the stories of families. And what really resonates with, what you just shared is that I found the impact would exponentially grow if I was in a place where I could really listen and hear, where clients are at, where families were holistically, and all the things that were going on in their life. And the more, we were in a position to do that, the more we could find solutions and supports that really allowed that improvement in where we're at. And I just really hear that with the naturopathic approach, is that you're looking at it from a holistic perspective. And I wonder if you could share a little bit about that kind of early inspiration that you experienced from your work in that field, and how that kind of informed your career path and the approach you take these days.
Yeah, I would love to chat about that. I also really appreciate that you brought this to the theme of listening. And that's something that I am often surprised by, really, and appreciative of, is the fact that really the for me to just have time with my patients and to be listening and to be really present with them is a profound experience for them. And it amazes me how important that is, and the feedback I get just from listening. Apart from anything I recommended or did, it really just the listening and holding space is so important.
Can feel like it's a bit of a lost art these days, the listening. We don't really have that opportunity to be heard that often. So when someone can sit down with you for 75 minutes and actually really feel that they can express what's going on, and then you're there to hear and look at it on so many levels, like it's beautiful. Thank you.
And it's a real skill I've noticed myself develop over time, the ability to, because I am trying to be as present as I can and listening and taking in, holding space, but I'm also, my doctor brain has to go at the same time and be thinking and problem solving, but also not to be taking away, so that I'm not doing that I'm listening, but only so that I can take my turn to speak, or I'm listening, but planning what I'm going to say next, which really takes me out of the moment and my ability to just be present with what's happening for them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So how did that early experience working with at-risk youth, sorry, I distracted you there.
Yeah,
but
let's bring it back to that. So
yeah.
I started really this journey that I'm on through working with at-risk youth. When I was in university, I spent my summers first volunteering and then working as a canoe trip leader for at-risk youth, which meant we were taking at-risk youth, which were defined really just by a youth that had a referral by a social worker. So these were, some of them were really average teenagers, which, it's teenage years is a hard time of life just in general, but also others had been, in and out of group homes. They had, the area that I was working in, there's a lot of penitentiaries, so they had parents in jail, or they themselves had been in different types of trouble or had different mental health diagnoses. We were taking them into the wilderness for 9 days or 15 days at a time in a small group.
Wow.
And it was, truly a profound experience for me and life-changing on many levels. And some of the essences of what that was for me are what led me to doing what I do now today as a naturopathic physician. And some of those pieces are knowing that connecting with nature is really important in healing, and connecting with other humans in a real, true way that is of listening and deep respect, and honoring that person is resilient and resourceful and whole unto themselves. Those were things that I really took from that experience, and knew, okay, I want to do something that's healing, something that involves nature. And it took me a while to figure out how to get there, and something that allows me to contribute to a community and build community in a meaningful way. That was an important piece of it as well, because that's what it was with the group of youth and staff being out in the wilderness. And it felt like our little tribe for that period of time. And it felt so good to take care of each other for that period. So that community element was really important to me as well. Yeah.
No, I really resonate with that and appreciate you sharing. And I like that idea that we all have the capacity inside of us to heal and to, leverage this innate resilience that, is contained within all of us to some degree. And then obviously history and trauma and, can suppress that. But I find so much of the, more allopathic medical system is a bit of a deficit model where we have disease, disorder, and often the treatments I find don't leverage that innate power inside of us. And obviously there's a time and place for both levels of treatment, but how does the naturopathic model kind of leverage that innate power to heal and support that? And, I guess prevention is one of those pieces as well. I'm just wondering, what your perspective is around that.
A great question, and a really nice articulation of one of my philosophical principles of how I approach medicine and how I approach my patients is knowing that I'm not the healer and they're really not the healer either. Their body is going to heal. It's our job, their cognitive self and my doctor self to support them in creating the conditions for their healing. And so, if someone comes to me with a complex chronic disease where there is no quote unquote cure, I know that I can help them feel better, at least because I'm looking at things like, how's their sleep? If they're not sleeping well, if we help them sleep, they're going to feel better because this sleep is when your body does repair. And so sleep is a really important piece. I'm also looking at, what kind of movement do you have? Do you have some kind of appropriate movement for you in your lifestyle? And that's also a piece that's really important for mental health, really important for energy and vitality. Just to feel like you have mobility in your body makes an essential difference in feeling good in yourself, in your body. I'm also talking to people about diet, what they normally eat in a day, how much water they're drinking. So some of those really fundamental things at the very base of the health pillar, making sure that those fundamental determinants of health are in place in as much as they can be for that individual person is so important. And that it's those pieces that allow us to make sure you have the sleep, the rest, the nutrients to be able to, for your body to heal as much as it possibly can. And a lot of my philosophies, a lot of my treatment tools are really built around that philosophy. For example, I do these vitamin mineral IV therapies, which is a way that I give a very high dose of a whole comprehensive set of vitamins and minerals directly into someone's bloodstream. Wow. So we're bypassing the digestive system, which means it doesn't rely on the capacity of your digestive system. It doesn't, if you have any kind of digestive condition that means that you're not absorbing as well, there's no concerns there. And it also means that we can give a lot higher dose of these vitamins and minerals than you would be able to absorb, even if we would be able to give a lot higher dose of vitamins and minerals that you would absorb, even if you were, I'm sorry, I got totally distracted because of something in the background.
No worries.
Okay, let me try that again. So what I was saying was that it allows you to bypass the digestive system. That's the first thing I said. And then the second thing is that it allows us to give a higher dose of vitamins and minerals that your digestive system would normally be able to absorb. Right. So for example, normally you can absorb about 1 to 2 grams of vitamin C at a time. And if you take any more than that, you just get diarrhea because you can't absorb anymore. In the IV, I can give 5 grams, 10 grams, 25 grams. For cancer care, sometimes we even go up to 50 grams. So I can give a whole bunch of these vitamins and minerals so that you're really, really repleted with vitamins and minerals. So I think of it as we're going to give your body all the building blocks so that it has all the ingredients that it needs to be able to do the healing that it needs to do. And that's such a beautiful way of just really supporting a body from a really fundamental place.
I love that. So it's kind of giving the sort of foundational ingredients for the body to do what it's always meant to do. And sometimes, due to life stressors and, issues, we get depleted and aren't able to kind of cultivate that resilience from within inside. So we are able to supplement it in unique ways. And And if we, start to take the conversation towards anxiety and how your, different treatments and the consultation would work for someone that is suffering with anxiety. Like I know, especially during these times, with the announcement yesterday around the further restrictions and the kind of COVID concern, there is so much worry and so much anxiety in the world right now. And even prior to COVID, I know, as far as mental health conditions, anxiety is like the number one global concern. And it's so debilitating. And obviously there's a spectrum of, different kinds of anxieties.
Yeah.
What do you see on Salt Spring in general? And then how do you work with those clients that are having these, incessant worries and these debilitating kind of negative thought patterns?
Yeah. Well, when I moved to Salt Spring, I thought, living in nature, living rurally, everyone here is going to be so relaxed, no anxiety, no stress. And I've learned through being in practice here that I was completely wrong about that. Absolutely. People on Salt Spring too struggle with anxiety and high stress. And it's absolutely a journey learning to work with anxiety. And there's a lot of different layers to that. The place that I start in my approach is always with the person's physiology, because there's some very physical things that can cause the experience of anxiety in your body. So we always start with ruling out what those things are. And there's some relatively simple lab tests that we can do to make sure that it's not something that's physical, that is your body's experiencing anxiety, when maybe it's actually not really anxiety as much as a physical process that's happening inside your system.
So these are the physical kind of manifestations of anxiety, whether that's like a heart rate or panic attacks or unable to sleep or things like that. You can look into those manifestations and palpitations to see if there are other kind of causes or reasons behind that.
Yeah, a great example is your thyroid. So your thyroid it's a gland that sits in the front of your neck right here. And the job of your thyroid is to set the metabolic rate of your system. And so that affects all the cells of your entire body. And so if your thyroid is under functioning, everything's going to be slow and low. You're going to be constipated and low energy, and you're going to lose your hair, and everything's like just dialed down. But if your thyroid is hyperfunctioning, that can be experienced almost exactly like anxiety, because it can look like your heart rate is elevated, you're sweating, you're nervous and anxious, you have a hard time sleeping, because everything in your whole system is just dialed right up. And so that's something that can feel like anxiety. Another really good example is blood sugar. If you're having big blood sugar swings up and down, that can also make you feel anxious and jittery, and it can be very difficult to discern whether that's blood sugar or whether that's anxiety.
Interesting. So people could be having this experience and tying it to stress or their environment, but actually there could be something really concrete physiologically going on inside of them.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Wow. And if you go through that sort of process of tests and that connection with that client, and, through that, there isn't anything sort of physiologically, identifiable, then where do you go with someone that's feeling that constant worry?
Yeah. So then we're talking about anxiety that doesn't have such a clear physiologic cause, but it is more true anxiety, which at that point, one of the pieces of the conversation I have is about, again, actually drawing that back to the physiology, because I explain that your emotional experience of anxiety has a physical side to it, because there are hormones and neurotransmitters being the signaling molecules in your central nervous system that mediate the experience of anxiety. Those are the things that are happening inside you to manifest that anxious experience of sweating or feeling in your chest, or your thoughts are spinning, whatever it is that your particular sensation of anxiety is. Now, and the hormones involved are cortisol, which is your stress hormone, adrenaline, which is another type of stress hormone, and then you've got neurotransmitters that activate your fight or flight side of your nervous system. So I really talk to people about those hormones and their nervous system. And that education piece is a really important part of understanding what's happening in your system. Do you want me to go into that a little bit?
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that. And
so first I'll talk about the hormones piece. And your cortisol is your stress hormone, and it's cyclic throughout the day. So you have a circadian rhythm, which is your 24-hour sleep-wake cycle. And in the morning when you wake up, cortisol starts to rise. And cortisol is really important because cortisol is the hormone that gives you some oomph to get up and go and to have energy to move around in your day. So cortisol rises in the morning, helps you get up, helps you wake up, and then it starts to go down during the day. And then it sort of rises a little bit in the afternoon, and then it goes down in the evening at the same time as melatonin is now rising so that you can go to sleep at nighttime.
Right.
Now, oftentimes this regular circadian rhythm gets very out of whack for folks who are either in a really high stress mode where they're not having a nice cortisol curve, they're just having high cortisol all the time because they're really stressed, or you can get to burnout where your cortisol is just flatlined and it's like you've got almost no cortisol. And the rhythm, because it's paired with melatonin, can also get out of whack when your sleep is out of whack. And melatonin, one of the things that impairs melatonin secretion in a profound way is blue light exposure. So this is electronic exposure, reduces our melatonin significantly. And when you're reducing your melatonin, you're not going to sleep, you're going to sleep later, you're having difficulty sleeping, that's going to affect cortisol the next day. And so that can start to throw off the cycle as well. And so that's something that I often talk to people about so that they understand the importance of sleep in managing anxiety, and also so that we can talk about can we support your adrenals in some way? And there are certain nutrients that are really important for adrenal function. So making sure your body has a lot of those nutrients. Pardon me, I didn't explain your adrenal glands are two glands that sit on top of your kidneys, and they secrete cortisol and adrenaline. So they produce the stress hormones in your body. So we want to make sure that they have the building blocks that they need to function well. And also we can talk about an adrenal support, which is a category of herbs called adaptogens that are herbs that help balance your stress response, and they're really normalizing herbs. And this is a big category, and herbs really tend to have their own herb personality. Every plant is different, and we start to get to know, okay, this plant is going to be better for this type of person or someone with this type of constitution. So we're selecting carefully what type of herb would be appropriate for them as an adrenal support to help normalize that stress response and build resiliency in their system so that they can have a more regular sleep-wake cycle and have a more regular secretion of those stress hormones, cortisol. But also, on that note, this is why routine is really important, and your body likes routine. And for people who struggle with anxiety, having a regular routine of going to bed at the same time every day, waking up at the same time, meals at the same time every day, that's going to feel really supportive for your system, especially when you're in a stage of, I need to really nourish my system right now, or I really need to focus on my health right now. Routine is a great way to do that. And then the other piece that I mentioned was the nervous system. And this works in conjunction, of course, with your hormone systems, but it's a little different. And your nervous system, so there's certain things in your nervous system that are under your conscious control. Like I'm moving my arm right now, but then there's other things that are not under my conscious control. For example, that's my heart rate or my lung function, all my organ functions. These are things that I don't have to think to make this happen. It just happens automatically. So it's the autonomic nervous system. And there's two sides to the autonomic nervous system, sort of like the yin and the yang. And there's an activated and a deactivated. And there's no such thing as neutral signals in the system. It's always either the activating type of signals or the deactivating type of signals, or some balance of both.
Right.
And so the activating side, this is the fight or flight. And this is the name of this, the scientific name is the sympathetic system. The deactivating is the rest or digest. And the name of this is the parasympathetic. And so what happens to a lot of us is that instead of being able to move smoothly between these two systems, is we get stuck in fight or flight. And this is really classic in, I think, modern Western civilization as a whole, because we live in a world that is relatively high stress and we're focused on efficiency and accomplishments. And so we're really driving really hard and not putting a lot of value on rest and recovery. And so we spend a lot of time in this fight or flight activated mode. And it's not bad to be in that fight or flight. It's actually good. If there's a threat, if there's a bear, if there's an emergency, you want to be able to activate that fight or flight. The trick is that you just don't want to get stuck there all the time, so that you can't actually get back down into rest and digest. And so understanding that about the nervous system, I think, is a really important, at least first step in being able to work with anxiety and your nervous system and recognize, okay, this is a physiologic response that my body's having. And I can work with that response to be able to practice and skill build so that I can bring myself down into that rest state. And there's so many ways to do that. And one of the places I sometimes start with patients with anxiety is saying, what can you do that simply feels safe? Right. What's an activity that you can do every day that you feel calm and relaxed? And that's something that's so unique to every person. There's really no one thing that should be. For someone, that could be, I like to sit in the garden and drink tea. And for someone else, it's like, I just want to lie in my bed. But for someone else, it's like, maybe it's more active for them, because maybe for them lying quietly is like, that's the opportunity for their brain to start going crazy, and it's not relaxing. And so for them, it's like, it should be going for a walk, because that's where they feel calm and they feel safe, and that's their safe space. And so just starting with, how can you spend some time in a place where your body feels calm down? And that sounds simple, but it's actually can be really, really deeply challenging for some people. And that can be for some people, it doesn't feel safe to be in their body. And then you can start getting into the world of people having trauma in their bodies and needing to work with that. But also for some people, it's like they're just so out of practice and disconnected with that. They need a little something to help them get there. And so there's some strategies that can help you shift into that parasympathetic mode. Nature being a really profound example of that. And there's literally molecules in the air and in the soil that help us regulate our nervous systems. And so that is a really profound way of getting a little bit of support in doing that when you're struggling. Hot, cold. So doing like a sauna with a cold water bath and doing that for a few rounds, that's a really good way of regulating your nervous system, as long as that's not too much for your system. And another way that I often suggest to people, especially if they're really having a hard time doing this for themselves, is work with someone else, because our nervous systems co-regulate. You can work with another person, because our nervous systems co-regulate to one another. So being with someone else, that could be a therapist, like a massage therapist, or a craniosacral therapist, someone who works with your system to help you co-regulate to their systems. That's a really beautiful and supportive way to be able to access that relaxed state.
There was so much there in what you said. That was lots to dig into. And I mean, one thing I'm curious about is how the sympathetic nervous system and the relationship between the sympathetic nervous system and cortisol and the sort of secretion of that creates that stress response. But it sounds like there's a link between that hormone and our sympathetic nervous system, and how that also increases kind of our arousal in that fight or flight mode. And then if we're living constantly in that fight or flight, and we're not sleeping well, and we're not, secreting the right amount of melatonin, so we're able to kind of slow down at the end of the day, then how do those interact? Do they kind of escalate the whole situation? And I guess within that, if we're looking at sort of the environmental condition of uncertainty, I suppose, which the world is feeling more than ever right now, and certainly when I used to work with at-risk families and vulnerable families, there was this level of uncertainty. And if you had bounced around different foster placements, or if you didn't know where your next meal was going to come from, you're constantly in this feeling of uncertainty, of worry. And how do we kind of reconcile that relationship between times of uncertainty, the stress hormones, and our body wanting to respond with this escalated, fight or flight mode.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So your question is, how do we reconcile the experience our bodies are having with what's happening?
Yeah, I guess it's not a really clear question. I guess it's more of like a comment in some ways that, within this time of uncertainty that seems to be almost like a bit of a petri dish for the anxiety to grow. What would be your sort of thought around that people may not have had anxiety in the past, but all of a sudden they're feeling this escalated kind of worry?
Absolutely. And I think, I'm seeing that a lot. I think, and as we go into the winter as well, and with new restrictions again, and the cold season and the dark season, mental health is going to become an increasingly large issue in BC and all across the world. And I see it in my practice. My sister is a nurse in mental health. So she's working on that real acute side of mental health. And they're seeing a lot of people coming into emergency for mental health concerns, more so than usual. So that's another interesting measure. And when we're in a world where there's uncertainty and the world doesn't feel safe the way it used to, that puts your nervous system on edge. And I've really noticed how, for us walking around in the world, in the community, it's a different experience than it used to be. Sometimes you walk by someone on the street and the body posture is like close in, look away, look down, fear. And it's really different from how it used to be. And I am aware of in myself, and I'm sure this is true for other people, that I think there's going to be a separate adjustment for me when this is all over, whenever that's going to be, that, okay, COVID, we're okay. But also then my whole system is going to need to adjust to the fact that the world is safe again. And it does, more to your question, it does really take a toll on us when we're in a situation that gives us anxiety constantly. It's like this constant low level of anxiety. And really what I would say to that is, we each need gentle tending right now. And this is not the time to be starting a big workout plan, doing weight loss, doing a big detox, doing things that are depleting for your body. It's really important to acknowledge that stress takes a toll on your system and requires emotional energy, and to allow yourself some gentleness and some spaciousness around that. And if you're not at home starting your whole new business right now and a whole bunch of new projects and accomplishing everything that you've been saving in your back pocket, that's okay. It's okay to be actually lying on the couch for a little longer than you might normally be, and just being really gentle with yourself in recognizing that there's a lot going on in the world right now. And I think sometimes that permission that it's okay is really helpful for the anxiety, because sometimes I think when you're fighting the experience that you're having, it makes the experience that much worse. And it makes the anxiety higher, because you're like, this isn't okay, and you're fighting it, but it's there, and it escalates, versus okay, I'm feeling anxious, I can notice that, I can let myself feel anxious and just acknowledge that that's what's happening right now. And
having that self-compassion for our situation and what we're feeling, for sure.
And this is not directly to your question, but sort of to further the spectrum of what my approach is to anxiety. I know that the most important and powerful way for an individual to work with anxiety is the relationship they have with their own selves and their own body, and notwithstanding some kind of physiological cause that's actually causing the anxiety to happen.
For sure.
And so for you to learn the skills in your body of some ability to tune into your system, some awareness of where you're at, the ability to ground yourself, that's ultimately the most powerful way to work with your anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And those are skills that take time and resources to be able to build. And it's really
Mm-hmm.
important for each person to have a toolkit like that wherever they source those tools, or whichever practitioner they're working with, or wherever resources. And in the meantime, I often working with people with herbal medicines that
Mm-hmm.
help support the anxiety, bring down the nervous system, calming, or medications that are anti-anxiety medications.
Mm-hmm.
And I always say with medications that it's a tool and it's not the solution, but sometimes it's a really important step, because it's
Mm-hmm.
not going to resolve this for you, but it might just give you a little bit of spaciousness,
Yeah.
so that you have a bit more capacity, so that you can start to build that toolkit that is going to allow you to go, oh, right, I know that if I go for a walk, I'm going to feel better. But if you're just completely anxious, you might not have the capacity to even recognize that. And so,
Right. So sometimes that medication is helpful to stabilize the anxiety, so I'm able to get into better routines, better sleep, better diet, more exercise,
yes,
more nature exposure, and find those other more sustainable ways to move forward in some ways, right? And
and
no, that
I
makes a lot of sense.
think there's a really profound question that, and this isn't necessarily for everyone, but there's a really profound question you can ask yourself with anxiety as well. It's like, what is this anxiety trying to tell me?
Mm-hmm.
What are you here for?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that can be a fruitful and really hard conversation with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something in my life that isn't right? Is it a relationship? Is it a job? Is it something that isn't serving me? And that's a gentle question to be posed, because that can be a really hard question, but there also can be a lot of important information in the anxiety when you can look at it that way. But like I said, to have some capacity to be able to even pose that question is that takes some steps sometimes to get there.
And I guess that can be discovered in different ways. I mean, I'm a big fan of journaling as a way to sort of start to express what's inside of us, and what different messages our body's sending us, means and could impact our life. And I suppose, working with a counselor or a therapist or other ways to explore what the body's trying to tell us in some ways, right?
And I think I really am a big proponent of having a team of people if you can, and that looks like often myself or someone else who's a naturopathic physician. Your medical doctor, your GP should also be there on your team. Your a counselor is really important to help you understand some of the stories, some of the backgrounds, some of the things that happened to you as you were growing up that might contribute to why you're having the anxiety. But I also think having someone who's working with your physical body is really important too, because I was just reflecting on this yesterday, that there was a time in my life where I used to think, oh, it's very interesting that there's this mind-body connection and this idea that, maybe we could store our experiences and our emotional experiences in our body. And now I know that to be true. And I've seen it enough times that I am aware, I take it as a given. And I'm also aware that not everyone does, because it's not necessarily common knowledge, but I know that I've been convinced through my experiences that we really store things in our bodies, and we don't always remember what those things are. But I'm talking about the traumas that we experience through life, and that can be big T trauma, like some kind of abuse, but it can also be little T traumas, like the small incidences of bullying that we experience that we probably don't even remember, or the time that our mother, who is a loving and wonderful person, snapped at us because something else was going on. Everyone has those kinds of experiences that have an effect, and we don't always remember what those things are. So to work with someone who works with your physical body and those things that are stored in there and your nervous system, that's a really important part of the team as well.
No, I'm so glad you mentioned that. I think, trauma is this word that has these connotations. It has to be this like massive, like horrible event in our life. And I
Yeah.
think, I really appreciate that that's being discussed more and more, that there are the sort of little t traumas, like you say. And I read a book somewhat recently called The Body Keeps the Score.
Yeah.
And it was just so eye-opening. And certainly
Yeah.
that was dealing more with like post-traumatic stress and big trauma, but it was just so, convincing that these experiences are just in our body and stored there. And so that kind of somatic work, and I know that you also work doing different breath work and ways to help kind of get more in touch with our body and release that energy in some ways.
Yeah, I do a specific type of acupuncture that's for working with trauma in the body. And that's something that I really enjoy doing because it allows me to support my patients in that really physical way, pardon me, that isn't about the story. And there's also a time and a place for the story, like I said, but also we need to work with our bodies. And the first stage in this acupuncture approach that I do is mothering. Such a nice, beautiful place to begin, is how do we bring some care and ease, safety, some holding to ourselves? How do we bring that energy to ourselves? And that's I think a really beautiful piece for anxiety too. It's like thinking about the archetype of mother. What does the mother in you, in each of us, feel like, and how can you bring that into how you're treating yourself? What would it mean to you right now to mother yourself?
That's really beautiful. I think there's a level of sort of trust in life that kind of comes into all of this. And I think back on those moments, with my mom and my dad, and feeling that love and security as a little kid. And for people that have missed that opportunity to feel that mothering, to feel that safety, there's innate kind of broken trust in some ways. And that makes uncertainty pretty hard to deal with, right? And then we live in this state of arousal, and it's a hard place to hang out all the time, for sure. Yeah. No, that's really well said. And so there are, I guess, to start to kind of bring the conversation together, it sounds like there's some real foundational pieces around the diet, around the sleep, and around being in nature and just being tender with ourselves right now, and just having that self-compassion and appreciation that the world right now is on edge. And I think one thing is that we do all have different histories, and some of us are rolling through life at a higher level of arousal due to whatever has happened in the past and whatever's going on physiologically. And I guess just as sort of a community message, I think it's nice to move into our days with a little bit more awareness around that, and knowing that if we're feeling a little bit more stable, like what can we do to give a bit more space, a bit more love, a bit more patience with people that may seem a little bit on edge at the moment, right? And because that in itself creates an environment where people feel a bit more supported, a little bit less anxious potentially.
I think one of the gifts for me and what I do is that I get to have this little window into each of my patients' lives, and I get to see their perspective. And what that allows me to receive as a human is this understanding that every person, and this is my belief, every person is inherently good and wants good things for themselves, for their family, for the world. And that gets twisted in a lot of ways all the time, and people have different ideas of what that actually means, and there's conflicts in the world, of course, but every person inside their own self, there may be hurt, or there may be, there's really good reasons why every person is the way that they are. And I think it's a really beautiful invitation that you offered just now to bring some understanding, some compassion to each other in this time of disconnect and anxiety and uncertainty in the world, especially in a small community where normally we would be used to having a lot more connection out in the street than we have right now.
A lot of people missing the hugs and thrifties right now, right?
Yeah, that's
So
right. Yeah.
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 No,
Yeah.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
no, I really appreciate the conversation, and I just think it's nice, I think, for people to know that if you're feeling this anxiety, you're certainly not alone, and
Yeah.
there are things that are possible for you quite quickly to help
Yeah.
support your body. Whether it removes the anxiety altogether is a process, but
Yeah.
as you say, just by getting better sleep, by
Yeah.
eating and giving the body more nourishment, and
Yeah.
by being
Yeah.
outside can be the starting point, right?
You said the word trust just now, and it made me think, it's healing is a journey, and anxiety is not meaningless. Anxiety is a part of that journey, and it comes from somewhere. Some of that has meaning that you can identify cognitively, and some of that you won't, but it also can lead somewhere as well. And I read this quote that was written by an anthropologist who studies shamanic cultures, which I think is a really interesting perspective, because he's got this really cross-cultural perspective on what is healing, deeper healing. And he says, dancing, singing, storytelling, and silence. These are the 4 true healing salves. And I like to share that with my patient, because I know, I'm just a step along each of their journeys too. And I hope that I can drop in a positive influence into their bucket, but I'm just going to be a drop in their bucket of their path, and to offer that context of, you are on a path, and that the healing journey requires all different elements, community and support, and a doctor, and there's so many pieces to that journey. And that with that quote, the way I understand that, the silence, that's your relationship with yourself, the quiet, the parasympathetic, and being able to have some presence and embodiment inside your own self, so that you have awareness, you have capacity, you have tools to be able to ground yourself. The storytelling is being community, being vulnerable, being witnessed, being acknowledged in your experience. That's such an important part. We need understanding, we need other people, and that's a huge thing that we're lacking right now. As beautiful as a Zoom call can be, it's not the same thing as an in-person connection. And the dancing and the singing, to me, is like taking your internal experience and making it writ large out into the world. Expression of that. The dancing is an embodied expression, but the singing, the singing is also, it's a really expression from your body. I think you can put art into that category as well. Some way of expressing what your internal experience is into something that becomes something in the world. And that's an important piece too. And I think that's a really nice thing to just see how, I like to share that quote with my patients, because you see how, oh yes, like this healing path that I'm on is a journey, and I know that I myself, Hannah, I know that I, as a doctor, can support my patients, and also that their journey is much more than our work together, and they are the ones who really do the deep work on the ground. And anxiety, as deeply difficult as it can be, is also an opportunity often.
Yeah, no, I think it can be a transformational catalyst in some ways. I mean, the opportunity to look within, and I like that quote, because to me it also speaks to the courage to kind of start kind of owning our authenticity and loving ourselves and accepting ourselves and being able to, celebrate our vulnerability by dancing and singing, by sharing my story with you, and knowing that, whatever you think about it, I love myself enough to give that out to the community, to the world. And I think, within that, there's so much empowerment and opportunity to really, embody our truth and let go of these societal kind of expectations and judgments that we all have such a hard time fitting into. And the more we try, the more anxious we can get trying if it's not our path,
Yes.
So I love that invitation.
Yes. And that's a whole piece I'm glad you brought that. It's a whole piece we didn't talk about, social media and the impact of social media on anxiety, which is huge. I think social media breaks could be one of the top interventions for anxiety often. And it really comes down to that comparing and that feeling of lack of wholeness. And it's so insidious. So insidious. You often don't feel that happening as it's happening until it's already happened.
Absolutely. I so appreciate your time, Hannah. It's been a really lovely connection.
Yeah.
Dr. Hannah Webb here on Salt Spring Island. And during these kind of more restrictive times, I'm assuming you're still doing like kind of Zoom consultations and providing your support however you can.
Yeah. If you are interested in finding more out about working with me, my website is drhannahwebb.com. That's DRHANNAHWEBB. I am doing Zoom consults, not Zoom, it's a telemedicine for doctors platform, but online consults. And I'm also doing in-person consults on Salt Spring Island. Depending on the patient's preference, of course, we're taking appropriate COVID measures. So you can look at my website to find out more, give us a call if you're interested. And I do 15-minute meet and greets that are complimentary. So if you want to get a better sense of whether my services or relationship with me would be right for you, you can do that as a way to feel out what my offering is. And I also have a free ebook on my website about anxiety and depression. So if you want to learn more about that, that's available too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And I just want to acknowledge you for the heartfelt approach you're bringing to your practice, to your patients. It's so needed these days. Thank you for everything you're doing. I look forward to connecting again.
Yeah. Thanks, Jai. Great chatting with you today.
Have a wonderful weekend. Take care.
Yeah, you as well.
Bye.
Bye.